Hello, Arkham Sessions podcast. This is Jason Inman from the Geek History Lesson podcast, and I just want to congratulate Brian and Drea on 200 amazing episodes. You have held our hand like a little robin through Gotham City, traveling into the minds of the worst and the best of Arkham Asylum. And I just want to say I've enjoyed every single minute, and I can't wait to hear episode 400.
Welcome, Gothamites, to the 200th episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
I am very excited about this. As I said, it's our 200th episode. We just kicked off our very first live watch-along on our Discord. We are now following it up with our very first live episode with listeners there in Discord waiting to send in their questions. But of course, we watched Batman Forever. So, it's a toss-up as to how tonight has been going so far. Hopefully everything goes very smoothly from this point on, and we have a lot of fun with this one. I want to ask you about your impressions of Batman Forever. When did you become familiar with this film? And is it something that you feel like held up over the years?
I have to admit that it's my fault that we chose this movie. I really pushed it hard because I thought it would be fun to have a watch along with a movie like this. I had not seen Batman Forever in forever. So I think I maybe saw it a couple times in the 90s when it was released. This is the first time that I've seen it in kind of like from the adult perspective, as a psychologist, as someone who's looking at through the lens of someone who is into behavioral science, and the fact that there is a prominent character in the film who is a psychologist is kind of interesting to me. So weirdly, as a kid or as a teen, it didn't really get onto my radar. But now, as we watched it, I was just really kind of enjoying the scenery. It's over the top. The villains are very hyperbolic. They definitely are dialed up to 11. The version of Batman is the opposite of that, kind of stoic, kind of well within that character, to be less expressive and very analytical. And then, of course, we have this psychologist who's thrown into the mix and maybe gives it a little bit of a sense of groundedness. But overall, I really did enjoy it. I thought it was a lot of fun.
I admittedly have not seen this film since it was released. I saw it when it came out in theaters. I owned all 4 of the collectible McDonald's glasses that you would get with the Happy Meals. I really hated this movie in 1995. As I watched it tonight, I still really hate this movie. But
I'm so sorry that we made you watch it, and now I'm making you talk about it.
No.
Why did you hate it?
It's not something to apologize over. It's people have to understand, especially since the last few decades, two decades have been dark Batman, dark gritty Batman. You've got the Nolan films, you've got the Zack Snyder films. Batman is going to play that dark, gritty character, but you have to remember, up until 1989, Batman fans never had that. We only had the cartoony versions of Batman that you ever saw until Tim Burton came onto the scene. So now, after 2 films, apparently Batman's too dark, and Warner Brothers shifts in the other direction, and they hire Joel Schumacher, who admitted that he wanted to make a campy comic book movie. And then you've got a couple of writers who came on, and I'm not even talking about Akiva Goldsman, but like the original writers came on, and they said that when they took the role of writing this film, they looked back on their memories of reading Batman comics as children. And I think that's sort of the problem, is when we start remembering what we were reading as children and then trying to adapt that to the screen, it becomes the antithesis of what those of us who wanted Batman to be, the dark hero, to be. And to me, Batman Forever, and I sort of figured this out after watching tonight, is it's not a comic book on the screen. It's more like a cartoon on the screen. And that to me became less appealing. I didn't want to see Val Kilmer as the cartoony Batman. I did not want to see those films. And it's interesting because I had been pushing for Batman 66 because you have never seen any of Batman 66, the movie, the TV series. And now as I'm watching Batman Forever, I'm like, God, I think they're sort of doing a 1990s version of Batman 66 for this.
I can see that. There's this sort of like, we're laughing with you. We're very aware. There's that fourth wall breaking.
Yeah. But some of us didn't want to be laughed at or with in watching their Batman movie.
Yeah.
You know, and so I didn't like it when it came out, and I still look at it just with sort of cringy glasses.
It wasn't, again, the person who's supposed to be grounding us is the psychologist. And even that character is somewhat mysterious and odd and has these different practices. I say practices, but ways of interacting, ways of socializing, ways of approaching people that no psychologist would do. Like the part of it is kind of unrealistic, and she sort of becomes a caricature of maybe what we would desire someone to be in the role of having an interest, a real clinical interest in these villains and in Batman. So it's sort of like everything is thrown together. I don't know that it necessarily works in a cohesive way, but it sort of works in maybe just giving us these different characters. I don't know that it works as a full picture.
Yeah.
Hi, Arkham Sessions. This is Levi Ramondelli. Congratulations on 200 episodes. I've loved the podcast since the beginning, and it's just been great to see. Thank you, and congratulations once again.
You mentioned Chase Meridian. So I want to ask you, Drea, because I feel like this is the first time we've seen a mental health professional anywhere besides, say, Jonathan Crane. You had the great honor and privilege of being written into DC canon as Batgirl's therapist. And you were so proud of that achievement, if for no other reason than the fact that you were the first psychologist in Gotham City to not go corrupt or be a crazed villain. You were trying to do the work. How do you feel about Dr. Chase Meridian as played by Nicole Kidman in this film? Is she a good therapist?
Well, first, it's been exactly 10 years since I was written into the comic books as Batgirl's therapist. I cannot believe it's been 10 years, but
has it been 10 years?
It has been exactly 10 years. And I am still speechless, over the moon, just really blessed and honored to be any part of DC storytelling or Batman storytelling. And you're right, there aren't a lot of characters who are simply compassionate professionals in the mental health field who happen to be embroiled in these different dramas and conflicts that happen in Gotham City, which we know are horrific and terrifying and strange and bonkers. And to have a stable, somewhat somewhat, I don't know, normal, typical professional in that setting, I think it's really difficult to write. I had nothing to do with the writing of the character. I consulted on the relationship between Barbara Gordon and the character, so there was a little bit of guidance there. This character is very interesting, and I think to write a character who's meant to be grounded and have a repertoire around mental health practice, and yet be on screen with these really stand out, exaggerated, hyperbolic villains and masked characters. It seems like it's difficult to throw that in. How is this all going to work? But I really liked her. There are some things that I disagree with, which I'll definitely talk about, but just my first impression of her is that she's really bold. She's confident. She knows her work. She's going to correct Batman. I mean, when Batman talks, like, how could you correct him? But she does right away. So she really holds her ground. And I think what I'm interested in is, like, what is her job? Why is she at all of these different like high level situations and conflicts, and then she's also going to all of the social gatherings. She's at all the parties, so she seems to have this really exciting life, which I don't know.
I hear jealousy.
I might be
might be a little
like, where are my invitations to hang out with Bruce Wayne at these?
All you got to do
parties?
is tell him as Batman, show up to my place at midnight.
Show up at midnight,
and he knows where you live. He knows where everybody.
He knows
in
where
Gotham
everyone lives. What I found myself disagreeing with was her passive, sort of observational role whenever something would happen. So we had at least two situations. The first was the violent incident when the Flying Graysons were performing, and we saw the origin story of Robin. Now we know that this is a very terrifying thing, not just for the family to experience, the Graysons themselves, Robin himself, Dick Grayson, but also for this huge audience, hundreds of people, to witness the horrors of this act. No pun intended. What's weird to me is that Dr. Chase Meridian, rightly so, first responds with shock and is a bit frozen in watching what's happening. And I realize it's a movie that doesn't lend itself to this, but in a real situation like this, if you were a licensed mental health practitioner, you might be a little bit more inclined to get involved in some way, not with the actual conflict itself, but some of the aftermath. So it disappointed me that she didn't engage in mental health first aid, or look around to see who was in distress, or call up to emergency services, or provide assurance to the witnesses who are experiencing this vicarious traumatic event. After all of this, there certainly has to be a recovery period, and maybe she's involved in that. But I was a bit disappointed. What was the second one? There was I think at the party there was that
the big party where Two-Face comes in with the machine guns and
right,
starts shooting everything
weapons,
she's
firearms, all this destruction, lost casualties, and she has no other interest but to smooch on Batman and then like create this plan to meet up at midnight, which is really late. We're not meeting up at midnight, like maybe 9 or 10, but that's I mean, she's already like in bed, like falling asleep. So
I don't know that she's falling asleep, but well, then, so I have two questions that are sort of contextual within the universe. You're talking about a psychologist in Gotham City, where presumably this sort of thing happens every Tuesday. So
sure.
So does that make a difference? And if not, I want to ask about the psychologists who might be in that situation, because like everyone else in the arena at the circus, the carnival, she is also experiencing that trauma. So at what point, like as someone in the mental health field, would you push that aside for the time being to jump right into action to help people? Or could that person also find themselves equally traumatized as, say, everyone else watching the Flying Graysons fall to their deaths?
I like this question because it reminds people that mental health practitioners and folks in the general health fields were not exempt from exposures to the, psychological impacts of violence, community events like this, shocking, unexpected events, natural disasters. Just because we happen to be on the scene doesn't mean that we are automatically kicking into professional gear and going into some kind of protocol. Having said that, there's going to be some professional equipment that we have in our tool belt, or our utility belt, as I like to say, different kind of utility belt. And it would be difficult to not engage some of those natural responses. We are in this field because we have purpose in that field. I don't go in and start stir frying in a kitchen when the cook falls ill or something. Like I'm not going to start doing something that's out of my wheelhouse, out of my professional abilities. But you realize that there are times when you have to step in, and to clarify, there's nothing ethical or legal about those responsibilities when you're a witness to something, or you're a passerby, or you just happen to be on site. But I think most of us with certain credentials and training and, as I said, a professional repertoire would likely find it in them to figure out how they can be supportive and help. And I think there might be other types of professionals who would agree that they may have some role to play in that. I'd also say that there are situations, even if you are a witness or a passerby or just happen to be there, like in this situation, just watching the event, being in the audience of a circus. There are situations, and I don't know if this is in her role as I'm not sure what her job is in Gotham City other than psychologist, but maybe she has a government or state issued role where she is paid to provide mental health first aid response, or again, mobilize an emergency response team, something like that. And in some situations where I'm not technically on the clock, but I am in a particular on site in a particular place, I would be expected to take on those responsibilities.
Paul Zare here, sending congratulations from the Great White North to Dr. Drea and Brian, our real-life dynamic duo, on the 200th episode of the Arkham Sessions. You folks have done so much for so many for so long in such an engaging and fun way. As the author who literally wrote the book on becoming Batman, I can confirm the Arkham Session podcast is 100% Batman approved and #1 on the Bruce Wayne playlist. Looking forward to the next 200 episodes. Congratulations.
I want to ask you about the person who's probably the next closest to the ground in this movie, and that's Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about him because we weren't introduced to him prior to the murdering of his parents. We're introduced to an immediately rebellious kid afterward, as he's brought into Wayne Manor, presumably to live forever now. But to me, Dick didn't seem particularly traumatized. He seemed angry.
Sure.
And I have a feeling he liked motorcycles and being rambunctious and rebellious prior to his family's demise. So I didn't really see where the trauma hit him quite as hard as maybe you did as a psychologist. Are we looking at someone who is going through their trauma in the best way they know how? Or are we looking at a kid who's maybe to quote Yoda, too old for training. Is he going to make the best Robin? Because you and I have said that Dick Grayson is actually a better Batman probably than Batman is. So talk a little bit about this interpretation of Dick Grayson and Robin.
Well, as I said, this Dick Grayson is a little bit older than the Dick Grayson that we might be familiar with in terms of when this critical event happens. Does that start to answer the question? I know there's a few questions in here.
I think so, because you're talking about the difference between a child experiencing the trauma and an adult experiencing the trauma.
Right. So if we think about an 8, 9, 10-year-old, even an older adolescent who experiences this horrific childhood trauma, you will expect to see a number of different responses over the course of his teenage years, young adulthood, and into his adult years. The fact that this Robin is already an adult, it's unclear to me how old he is. Chris O'Donnell looks like he's 30.
Well, he said college going.
He did?
Yeah,
okay.
or earlier, like later in the movie, he's after he has assumed the role of Robin without Bruce's permission. Bruce says, "How about the role of college student?"
Yeah.
Dick Grayson. So he's college aged.
Yeah. So he's I
don't think he's enrolled in Gotham University.
He's not in college. And that's important. I'm not saying that this traumatic event will not impact him. It will impact him differently. And I think that this film, even though I know they have a lot of other cinematic film plot interests in mind, not so much how are we going to show a realistic version of recovering from trauma for this kid. I think that because he's a little bit older, his interpersonal response kind of makes sense. Like, leave me alone. I don't really need anybody. I don't need you. I'm not impressed. I've had this kind of lifelong dream. My social support is gone. Everybody who I cared about, everybody who knew me and knew what I was all about, as an acrobat, they're gone. So his sense of purpose, his sense of affirmation, certainly his connection to his family, like he's lost a lot of things. He's not just lost his caregivers. And I think his reaction is realistic. To be angry and vengeful, especially when you're dealing with what we call interpersonal trauma. So a natural disaster, an earthquake, even sometimes some versions of warfare. Not all, but some of those different losses and experiences of violence, when it's not personal, it's a different type of recovery. When it's personal and you feel targeted and you know exactly who it was, this figure, this person, this in the case of this film, Two-Face, he becomes this known and hated figure in Gotham City. So Robin has these different reactions that I think are very realistic to interpersonal trauma, targeting and directing your hatred and vengefulness toward that person. That's very reasonable. That doesn't strike me as being irrational. Even his willingness to harm Two-Face, if not up till the very end, think about murdering Two-Face. That is a very reasonable response to the kinds of things that he was experiencing. But yeah, that kind of that idea of pushing somebody away or being unresponsive to the care and the maybe the offerings that other people are presenting to you, that is a protective traumatic response. The feeling of not wanting to get close to other people or to accept their compassion or even to want to feel understood, those are all very normal reactions to something like this.
Right. Over on our Discord, Hunter S. Tomcat asks, do you think if they didn't go with the don't push the button treatment with the locked room, that obviously leads to the Batcave, do you think he would have tried so hard to see what was in there? Like, based on
the reverse psychology of that?
Yeah,
don't go in there.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder if Alfred, it was Alfred who told him not to go in there. I wonder
He
if
said that it's the silver closet, which, by the way, if
does that mean?
if I were a punk kid, like it's the only room that's locked in the house because they keep the fine silver.
Oh,
in
the
there.
silver. Sorry, I didn't have silver growing up.
But if I were a punk kid that felt rebellious, telling me that the silver closet is the one that's locked, I might be trying to get in there just to get some of that silver. But
yeah.
But
it does seem like there was, and I wouldn't be surprised if Alfred had this this underlying motive, like let's kind of like spark your curiosity. We've seen him do that in other
so you
ways.
think Alfred was like?
I think Alfred was.
It's like dangling a little carrot,
suggesting that he check it out.
Because he could have said it was cleaning chemicals, but instead he's like, the silver's back there. Don't go in.
I'm tempting you with the silver room. If someone said that to me, I would just think that it's like silver wallpaper or something. I wouldn't understand what that meant. But yes, I think for someone like Robin, he doesn't like to be told what to do. And certainly when you say don't do a thing, he might be more willing to check it out.
And it's some old dude telling him not to go in there too. So that just makes it worse.
Yeah, good question.
I want to ask you about, I don't know, do you want to go with Batman next, or do you want to leave Batman for the end and really tackle these two villains? Who do you feel like you're going to have a better time with right now? Riddler, Two-Face. You know what? Let's go Two-Face, because Two-Face is the lesser of the two villains. He's sort of the sidekick villain of this particular movie, played by Tommy Lee Jones, taking over for Billy D. Williams from the 89 movie. A lot of people really disappointed that Billy D. didn't get the offer to come back and play Two-Face. But instead, we've got Tommy Lee Jones. He's chewing the scenery in every scene he's in. Really committed. I'll give him that. I don't think he's not trying to go with a realistic approach. He is going with the Batman 66 cartoony version of a Two-Face character. What did you think of Tommy Lee Jones's performance? And more importantly, this incarnation of Harvey Dent, how do you feel?
He was at first very intriguing. I liked that scene where he's flipping the coin and he's in just a few seconds just letting us know what he's all about. I think I wanted more of that depth. The rest of the movie seemed to be he's like dialed up to 10 on the entirety of the movie. I wanted to see a little bit more internal conflict. Should I choose the rational, instrumental approach? He can still be violent. You know, we've talked about this on the show before. Instrumental violence is very methodical. It's planful. It's straightforward. It's unemotional. And I kind of wanted to see him struggle with those two sides of him. Not should I be good or bad, but should I be the rational version of myself, the Harvey Dent, the true Harvey Dent still might be
in there somewhere.
Yeah, but might be dangerous and violent and methodical. And the other side of Two-Face is much more erratic and frenetic and somewhat adrenaline seeking. And while I was watching, I just kept thinking, this seems more to me like an animated series Joker, you know, just constantly laughing, hysterical, looking for ways to feel something in his body. We've talked about this concept of seeking adrenaline, like almost like being a junkie or an addict. I use those words in a euphemistic way, not in a denigrating way, but to say like he's drawn to those feelings, and the only way he can get those feelings is to be murderous, is to take chances, is to be risky, is to put other people in danger. That's kind of what makes him tick. And so I saw this as more like a Joker version than a real conflicted Two-Face.
But then we get that Two-Face toward the end. We get Harvey toward the end.
Sure.
When Batman reminds him that he's supposed to flip the coin, that he's a slave to that coin. And for a moment, Harvey breaks through and says, "Thank you, Bruce. You've always been a good friend. You're absolutely right. I need to do this." And then ultimately Bruce is setting him up to fail because he's got a ton of coins that he then throws up, at the same time. So
that's what breaks him. It's so funny because, dozens of coins being thrown at him breaks Two-Face. Like that's when he loses it.
Well, I think what breaks Two-Face is falling off the thin rail he's on when those coins are thrown at him. But
sure.
But yes, I did appreciate seeing that little moment of he's not being so grandiose. He's not being so over the top. He actually comes down for a moment when he realizes he's talking to his old friend Bruce, and Bruce has got me. You're absolutely right. I'm supposed to toss the coin. So there is a little of that dichotomy, though not much. But then they start to play with the whole Batman 66 homage thing of having the two sidekicks that are appropriately, one is an angel, Drew Barrymore, Debbie Mazar is the devil, which, by the way, when you see them after their introductions, he's only ever with the devil character from that point on. Like the Drew Barrymore character is sort of almost relegated more to being the assistant to Edward Nygma. She's there during the big party. She's the one who stops Bruce from snooping around the machine. But the devil character is the one that's always with Two-Face going forward.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's made that choice.
He favors her.
Anything else with that character, given that he was kind of, by the way, I know I told you this during the reaction video, but like it famously, infamously even, Jim Carrey tells the story that Tommy Lee Jones absolutely loathed him during the making of this movie. Does not like the big over-the-topness of Jim Carrey or his movies, and apparently was not thrilled with the scenes that he got to play with him, which is funny to me because he seems like he's constantly trying to outdo Jim in every scene that they're in. Even when he's in the background, he's
it's a little weird.
Making big gestures and you're like, wait, I thought you hated this.
Yeah, like a stage show where it's important that 100 rows back, those people are going to see your movements and your facial expressions. Yeah. I have to say, this is not my favorite Two-Face. The only part that I appreciated, the parts that I appreciated, this is my point, is that his purpose is to uplift and bring to light the idea of duality or parts, right? So who is Batman in juxtaposition or alignment with Bruce Wayne? And Two-Face is always going to be that mirror, is always going to have Bruce Wayne question his real self, his integrated self. Do these things, do these roles, do these personas have to be separated? And I'm a huge fan of IFS, internal family systems work, which is all about how all of us have different parts to us. Some are very well-meaning and altruistic and kind. Some parts of us are like these characters, angry and rageful and jealous and menacing. And no one is exempt from that, right? We're not all one thing. And Two-Face, for me, Two-Face is supposed to kind of represent quite again, hyperbolically and visually, this idea that you've got to find a way to integrate the different parts of yourself, or you're going to end up destroying the person you are. You're essentially not a full person.
Yeah.
So I've always liked that idea. And I like that he brings out the self-awareness, which we see really happen in Bruce Wayne.
Hi, Drea and Brian. This is Barbara Dillon calling from Fanbase Press. First and foremost, I wanted to congratulate you both most sincerely on approaching your 200th episode of the podcast. My goodness, what an amazing milestone. But ultimately, I wanted to say a huge thank you to you both for all of your hard work, your dedication, and for sharing your time and talents with the world, frankly, over the past few years with the Arkham sessions. Seeing the impact that you've had, not only through your episodes, but in person at conventions and through other means is truly remarkable. And we have you both to thank for that. So thank you for all of your hard work. It's been an honor here at Fanbase Press to be able to share your episodes with our listeners. So thank you for that as well. And I hope we have 200 more episodes after this to look forward to. But sincerely, congratulations to you both. And thank you again.
We have another question from our Discord, and it's actually from my father. Is Harvey Dent / Two-Face an example of multiple personalities, and is the disfiguration of his body metaphorical or of a physical or a mental pain? Now, they did say earlier in the movie that they believed, she was trying to diagnose Two-Face, and she was saying that the trauma of whatever he went through, which we later found out was a scene in the courtroom, which is traditionally where Harvey gets his scarred face. Although this time Batman was unable to help him or save him, so he leans on a hatred of Batman for crashing the courtroom too late. But the two of them, Bruce at the time it's Batman and Chase, are talking about sort of a diagnosis for Two-Face. They're almost giving him a split personalities, a dissociative identity disorder diagnosis, simply because he was traumatized and it split him into two. We've talked a little bit about that in the past, especially as it relates to Two-Face. Tell me about that.
Based on what we're seeing in the film Batman Forever, Two-Face doesn't seem to have distinct personalities that are foregrounded and backgrounded in his consciousness. In other words, it's not as if he has these prominent identities or personas that take over his consciousness while others are deep in his subconscious. That's sort of what DID is about, where you don't have the personas necessarily interacting with one another. You have a persona that's the prominent, usually the one that's present, and then you have one or more personalities that are working within your psyche. This is a really difficult diagnosis to make. There's a lot of other more common diagnoses like PTSD or clinical depression that may better capture the symptomatology of somebody who's presenting with a lot of different personality styles. And in this Two-Face, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's ever a time when he's having lapses in memory or doesn't remember what he's doing, or seems to tell us that some other persona is responsible for his actions. No. He just seems to have primarily one main personality and an idea, I suppose, of letting the coin make his decisions, which is not DID or multiple personalities.
What about the disfiguration of his face, his body? Do you see that as being a sort of symbolic of the physical and mental pain that he's going through?
We only see a glimpse of what happened to him. I think he's attacked by acid, or he's in an accident where half of his face is disfigured because of the acid. And certainly any kind of life-threatening accident or experience is traumatic and will likely lead to some cognitive and emotional and physical reactions, right? Feeling hypervigilant, on guard, having flashbacks and nightmares about what happened, having a sense of foreshortened future, which means that we, like when enough bad things happen to us, we sort of start to believe something else is going to happen. I won't live long enough to see my older days. That's what a sense of foreshortened future is. So we're going to see those sorts of things. I think too, when someone experiences an accident that is going to result in a constant reminder of that trauma, like a facial disfigurement or a severe, physical change to your body, that also leads to some added psychological impacts and
Sure.
and potential issues or problems, difficulties like lower self-esteem, a sense of feeling like no one understands you, a sense of feeling like you don't want to be out in the world. People are going to ask you. Now, this isn't a non-Gotham situation. People are going to ask you what happened. Are you okay? It's going to you're going to constantly be reminded of this trauma. Whereas in Gotham City, there's sort of an interesting thing that happens where it becomes his sense of significance. So this is almost like now a doorway into certain behavior. Since I look like a monster, I get to act like a monster. So I'm going to be willing to harm others. I'm going to access weapons. I'm going to scare and frighten and terrorize civilians. It kind of goes hand in hand with this kind of persona that we see in Gotham City. It's very acceptable to do that. So it's not surprising that he, although we don't really see his origin, that he goes down this path.
I was going to say that because it's almost the grandiosity of the city itself. I mean, just the architecture of the city is bonkers. So you would think that in order to be relevant, he has to be even more over the top. And we saw an episode of Batman the Animated Series where Bruce was willing, as Bruce Wayne, to pay for the treatment to surgically enhance, make better. I don't know that they could make him look like Harvey Dent again, but they were going to try to take those scars away. Are you suggesting that if you don't have that constant daily reminder, that maybe Harvey could come back?
Well, this was the premise of The Dark Knight Returns, right? A Frank Miller book, wasn't it? Am I thinking of... Yeah.
Well, it's not Dark Knight Returns.
What
Which
am I thinking
one?
of? Well, maybe someone in Discord can help me out with my failing memory. This is a story in the comic book, but this is the question: what would happen if he's healed physically, right? His medical and physical conditions are cured. That doesn't necessarily mean that he won't engage in this kind of antisocial behavior. He had, as you will not be surprised, some pre-existing tendencies, probably narcissism, a sense of destruction, maybe even that interest in risk and risk-taking, a need to be feeling euphoric. And for some people, you cannot feel that in normal day-to-day experiences. You need to kind of dial up those situations. So again, how do you get that feeling? You terrorize other people, you create havoc, you abuse, and you take that internal chaos and you externalize it.
Hunter S. Tomcat asks, when the Riddler photoshopped his head on the statue of David, do you think he was thinking of himself as the best, both physically and mentally over others? But then later on, he totally copied Bruce. Why do you think he did that? We can talk about Riddler now. You were talking about, as we were watching the movie, you were talking about seeing narcissism. You were seeing a number of other, talk about this incarnation of the Riddler.
I really liked the Riddler in the beginning of the movie. He is that very eccentric experimenter.
So you're talking about the scientist Edward Nygma.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's kind of pre-Riddler.
Yeah.
Still clearly a little bit edgy and clearly very irrational, very narcissistic. He meets his heroic figure, Bruce Wayne, and he is met with kind of this dismissiveness, right? Like Bruce Wayne doesn't give him the attention and accolades and the positive impression that Edward Nygma is expecting, because Edward Nygma sees himself as the greatest and the smartest, the most, just the most, I'd say, what's the word I'm looking for? Like he has the superiority about him. Mm-hmm. So he not only is this scientist who works for Wayne Enterprises, he is also the best scientist. So he is centering his own experience around this idea that everybody should be impressed by him. All of his projects should be funded. He is met with this like kind of uninterested Bruce Wayne. And I found that to be a turning point. I said on the show, like, okay, this is a turning point for Edward Nygma, because
right when that door closes, right when Bruce leaves and the door closes. But I want to piggyback on something that you're saying, and I apologize for interrupting you. But he's not just dismissive of Edward. He rejects him outright. He says there are too many questions to your research. There are too many, like, this is too dangerous to exist, and that too completely sends Edward off, because as I'm sure you know, as a scientist yourself, if someone comes in and just says, someone who doesn't know what it is you're doing comes in and goes, I don't think this is sound. You know,
it's
he
a
blows
hit.
up.
It's a hit to your ego, because ostensibly you've spent years putting together this investigation. You've been putting together this research project, or this this series of experiments that, at least in this situation, that you poured your life into, right? So for someone to say they're not funding it or they don't believe in it can feel like a personal criticism. What we learn is that Edward Nygma experiences that criticism as kind of a deep hit. You know, he experiences it more personally than professionally in a way. Mm-hmm. He is, as I said, it's sort of a turning point, because he immediately directs his disdain and anger toward Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
And sure, he had some nefarious things that he was interested in with his like weird VR, AR, mind melding manipulation machine.
Blender.
It's not clear what he was trying to do.
Maker.
Yeah, he clearly wanted to have, well, it wasn't clear what he wanted to do, but what was clear is that he was trying to assert control over other people, which is a very core part of narcissistic personality. Not just this sense that other people should admire you and should respect you and should look up to you, but that also there's this sense that you want to have control over other people, that you don't like the feeling of helplessness or being less than. And so any way that you can continue to feel like you can dominate other people. That's kind of what narcissism is about.
Dr. Drea and Brian, what is up? It is Ali Matu from the YouTube channel, Dr. Ali, and I am so excited to be wishing you congratulations on reaching 200 episodes. I remember exactly where I was when I listened to episode 1. I was walking towards Union Square in New York City, trying to get onto the subway to go home, and I was struck by the serious fun of Arkham Sessions, like how Dr. Drea was bringing all of her knowledge and experience in clinical psychology to understand the subject matter. And then Brian was bringing all these real world examples of man-baddie like things to the episode as well. And it was so serious and so fun. And I really loved that balance. And while the world has been turned upside down in so many ways, and my life has changed, I'm no longer in New York, and now I have 2 kids. Like, what the heck happened? And there was a pandemic and all that stuff. But throughout all that time, you all have had this consistent voice of exploring these different stories in such a fun and serious way. And I love that. But where's Indiana Jones? You haven't covered Indy. Can you tackle Indy before the new movie? Thanks.
I want to ask you about him after he's become Riddler now, becomes completely unhinged, takes his identity from a bobblehead and a fortune teller that he keeps in his home, which, by the way, you said when, you know, that all geniuses are eccentric and have this kind of home.
Well,
and then I look at our collections and I'm thinking, yeah, this tracks.
I think Chase Meridian was the one who said there's an obsession.
Yeah.
And we see that. We see that in his lifestyle. We see that in his professional lifestyle. We see that in his personal lifestyle. He is hyper fixated and focused on one thing. And I'm unclear on what that, again, it's like, what is that one thing? It seems like it's these riddles, this like weird Riddler-esque doll, this kind of, it's almost a perverse berserk version of scientific curiosity. Like I don't think it's too far off that someone starts out with an interest in the scientific method and is just deeply passionate about scientific discoveries, and then somewhere along the way gets hyper focused and overly almost overly addicted to this concept of trying to find solutions and trying to be right, and then when you fund or provide this person with lab equipment and all the different accoutrements he needs for his mind machine, then things get out of control.
I like to think of him as a representation of all of the scientists from my favorite era of psychology, the golden era of psychology, after they have just been told you can't do this stuff anymore. Now there are organizations that are going to oversee what you're doing. We're going to give you approvals. Like, I imagine that these sorts of people would be the ones to then get real angry and you know, take that kind of thing personally.
Well, as I said, when you are engaging in an experiment or looking for funding and infrastructural support for your experiments.
And they did say that he was going to lose his fund.
Yes.
Like, they come right out and say that.
You cannot simply run your research. You are going to need to get various approvals. And if you do not follow the various human subjects guidelines and protocols, then you're likely going to lose whatever institutional funding, support, staffing, again, infrastructure. All of that is going to be taken from you, and more potentially. You could lose your license if you have a clinical license. You could You could be essentially banned from conducting certain types of human research. There's lots of different things that you need to be mindful of. So it's obviously in Gotham City, they have a different structure for this, where Bruce Wayne sort of makes all the decisions on what happens. But
everyone in Gotham works
risky
for Bruce in some way, shape, or form. I think he just constantly has his thumb on them, just to make sure everything's cool. Got to check in with them from time to time. If things go awry, I fire you.
I almost think it's like mousetraps. Like if you are going to go to that cheese, then we're going to catch you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But I also think it's one of those self-fulfilling, Riddler would not be the Riddler. Enigma would not be the Riddler had he not gone through the trauma of being fired by Bruce Wayne, his hero, being told that his science was unsound. And it's another one of those self-fulfilling, Batman is really just providing Gotham with more villains for him to beat up. Or in this case, destroy mentally with his own machine.
Hey guys, I just want to say thank you for putting out this wonderful content. It's really helped me to think more in depth about the way that I see and treat people in mental health practice. It's also helped me along on my own journey as far as becoming a forensic mental health evaluator. And I actually used Bruce Wayne as a subject for a mental health evaluation. And your podcast is really what inspired me to do that. So I'm really excited to see where you guys go next and how you continue to use pop culture to spread a message of awareness of mental health. Thanks a lot, guys.
So I suppose we should end this conversation with a bit of a deconstruction of Batman.
I guess if you got to talk about a character in a Batman movie, Batman is going to be one of those you're going to want to talk about. So there was an interview given by Val Kilmer, who took over from Michael Keaton. What a lot of people don't necessarily know or realize is that Michael Keaton was going to come back for the third movie. After the complaints about how dark the second movie was, Warner Brothers asked Tim Burton to go off and work on something else. Although he had consultation and actually helped pick Joel Schumacher as the director of this film. But Michael Keaton didn't bow out until he had a meeting with Joel and realized the direction he was going to take the film. And in his words, the idea of lightening it and cartooning up the character was not something he was interested in. So he decided to bow out. Val Kilmer comes in at the height of Val's popularity. But then afterward, years later even, Val Kilmer made the comment that for him, he doesn't feel like he got to act in this movie, because when you're Batman, you're very particular. You're a certain way, very stoic. You're not allowed to show any personality. And as Bruce Wayne, you should be able to show personality, but again, he's got to be that stiff guy who's constantly telling Chris O'Donnell that you're being a bad kid, and so I find that analysis intriguing, and that's actually why Val didn't come back to do a second movie, was because he's like, I don't want to just be in a suit. The suit's the actor in this particular case. So let's talk about Val Kilmer's Bruce Wayne and Batman.
I give him a lot of credit for manifesting his version of Batman while behind the suit and the mask and the makeup. I think it's hard to be both expressive and also know this is a character who is, as you said, stoic and isn't supposed to be over the top.
Yeah.
And yet you have these villains who, now that you describe the situation on set between Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey as constantly almost agitating each other to dial up their performances.
Yeah.
Val Kilmer becomes even more almost backgrounded, like he's just like in the shadows. I wonder if that helped him kind of work out who he was going to be as Bruce Wayne. And when we posted that we were going to cover this movie, a lot of people shared with me that they like this version of Batman. And in particular, they felt that Val Kilmer creates a very believable Bruce Wayne. And I appreciate that because look, he doesn't have a lot of screen time, but he manages to kind of be anything but superficial. Like, I'm not seeing somebody who's simply quiet and unassuming. There is something a little bit more interesting about this Bruce Wayne. And, you know, we also have seen a lot of Bruce Waynes, and we've seen a lot of Bruce Wayne's trauma over and over again. Like, we're traumatized by how many times we've seen this poor kid witness his parents die.
You brought up a great point, though, when we see this version of the scene, the famous scene in the alleyway, and then we get to see him at the funeral of his parents. And it's a very dreamlike, very nightmarish version of this memory. You brought up the point that this is actually a great interpretation of faulty memory, of you remembering it darker than it really is. And, talk a little bit about that.
I really liked the style of this film. And I think I said this in different ways, but it's very campy and it's very predictable, but there are also these moments of psychological darkness, again, ones that we're familiar with, but as in the example of his childhood trauma, it's these angles, these shadows, these just flashes of almost like photographs, and so stylized. And I think people may not realize that our traumatic memories are similarly kind of stylized and weirdly stamped or branded in the way that we experience them. So things might actually be a little bit darker. They may be they may be foggy. They may have these kind of lapses or stutters, if that makes sense, in the way that we remember it. We're not going to remember it in a linear way. We might remember trauma in a way that is in like snapshots, like just kind of glimpses or flashbacks.
Or you might remember, instead of a bat quickly flying past you, you might remember it flying directly toward you by itself with red light behind it in slow motion. It's coming at you. That's how you're going to remember it.
So light, color, movement, the way that we remember it may actually not look realistic in our brains. And, later he's remembering even more. There's this moment where Chase, I think she like knocks over a vase and it happens to have those roses and then they fall. I wonder if he's like putting them around the house to see like, is something gonna, maybe I'll remember something. But that moment also triggers something in him, and he remembers an image, something that he didn't remember before. And she tells him that's a repressed memory. It's very real. It's probably something that you've hidden in your psyche because it's too painful to remember that detail.
Now, are dreams where those repressed memories tend to come out?
Sometimes. Sometimes. But sometimes dreams are wishes or desires or remnants of counterfactual thinking.
Yeah.
That idea that something else might have happened. And so dreams aren't necessarily reliable.
And even
memories.
in your field, like they say, say hypnotherapy, they talk about repressed memories. And you have said in the past that sometimes those repressed memories aren't even memories. You are now conjuring these things up. So
You
it's
have to be
possible
really-
Batman doesn't even actually remember what he thinks he's remembering.
Right. You have to be really careful about trying to, quote, trigger a repressed memory in a client or patient. That scene between Dr. Chase Meridian and Bruce Wayne, where they're both sitting on his couch and it's a very intimate moment and he's sharing some of his deepest thoughts and feelings. It felt like a therapy session, but she's enamored with him. So there's this mixture of intimacy and vulnerability, and also it does feel a little bit there's this power dynamic. It feels that there's a lack of balance there. Is she his therapist or not? I would prefer that those lines are a little bit clear, because obviously if he is her patient, she should not be kissing him or flirting with him or I'd even say, being at his house in this particular situation.
Hi, Drea. Hi, Brian. This is Melissa Miller from the Star Warsologies podcast. I just wanted to drop in and say thank you so much for 200 episodes. I should really listen to them all, because every time I do, I get some insights about Star Wars, about Batman, about my favorite pop culture, and what that means for making myself a better person too. So I just want to thank you for all of that. And Dr. Drea, I want to thank you for coming on Star Warsologies and letting us know that Leia is in fact the most well-adjusted character in Star Wars. And I loved hearing your dive into that more in all of your Star Wars episodes, and in your Obi-Wan Kenobi episode, and look forward to hearing more about that when you get around to the rest of the movies. Thanks so much for everything you do. Keep it up. Bye.
I want to ask about the arc of Bruce Wayne once again believing that he's the only one who can do this, to then taking on a partner, someone he actually calls a partner. How do you feel about that?
One of the reasons that I think I like Val Kilmer as Bruce Wayne is that he's a Bruce Wayne who is willing to think about his own well-being and psychology, that he makes these decisions that are about his caring for himself and other people. There's a little bit less of the kind of a cold, uncaring version that sometimes we see. Not that Batman's uncaring, but that sometimes he chooses the craft, he chooses the work over a connection to people or over his own healing. And this version is a little bit more willing. I mean, he's talking to a psychologist. He's willing to sit there and unpack the demons that live in him. He's willing to think about what's better. Should I just quit being Batman because things have gotten complicated and I'm putting young people in danger? So he's a little bit more thoughtful and psychologically complex in that introspection. I really appreciate that about him. I'm not sure if I answered the question though.
Yeah, I think.
Did I?
Yeah, I think so. So Drea, now re-experiencing Batman Forever for the first time in a long while, you feel like it holds up. You really dig this movie.
I can understand why some people are saying this is one of their favorite Batman movies, and I get it. I don't get the nostalgia, because certainly I barely remember seeing this as a kid. But I think what I understand is how people are kind of connecting to the characters, maybe not so much to the villains, but to the heroes. It's certainly not my favorite Batman film. I mean, that's certainly clear, but I'm willing to...
Batman Returns.
Yeah, Batman Returns is my favorite film. But I think I'm willing to understand this as a valid installment of the Batman cinematic, storytelling.
Yeah.
I appreciate it there. And like I said, obviously the fact that there's a mental health practitioner who's trying to figure out who he is as a person and who connects with him. I kind of feel like that's a way for us all to connect with him. Like that character exists because we're all trying to improve our understanding and get closer to him. That's what all of us are exercising here. It's like, I just want to understand and maybe get up close to his face and kiss him. And that will help me understand him a little bit. She takes it a little too far, but I think we get it.
And of course, the bad therapist, the one that crosses the ethics lines, got to be a redhead. She's got to be a redhead. Riddler's a redhead.
Chris O'Donnell is not a redhead.
Chris O'Donnell, not a redhead.
Okay, just checking.
Well, I'm glad we got to watch this together. I'm glad that we got to watch it with members of our community. Hopefully we get to do this kind of thing again and more often than once every 200 episodes. But I want to thank all of you for joining us and making this possible. I want to take this opportunity to thank our patrons, Andre Tate, Dr. Jerome Anderson, Antonio Lopez, Candy B, Kevin Ortel, Todd Stashwick, Hero's Journey Fitness, Frank Muller, Scott the Therapist, Mark Pepper, Emily Higgins, Swara Salih, Michael Pruitt, Weffy, Rachel Acevedo Hoffman, Eric O'Sullivan, Zach Neal, Uncle Mo, Dr. Girlfriend, John Henry, and of course, my father, Carl Ward. Thank you all for making these episodes possible. We very much appreciate it. Till next time, Drea, when we're going to come right back to where we left off on Star Wars, which I think is Force Awakens?
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, and on Discord. Let's just push the Discord. I love Discord now. It's a place where anyone can join to have discussions, ask questions, be in community. We would love folks to join us. Just how do we do it?
This was fun. Yeah, like this was a lot of fun.
Wait,
actually.
how do people? We'll just post the Discord.
Yeah, we can post the Discord.
We'll post it.
You set it up, right? It's discord.com / the Arkham Sessions. Yeah. You can just join us there. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at bward028, on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find me on Discord, and all that stuff. Come follow our family over at Fanbase Press and enjoy all of their news and reviews and comics of their own, and also their podcasts. And until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.